fellow riders, and welcome back to Airhead Barn. In these last couple of episodes that are focused on the rebuild phase of this interesting restoration project, I'm going to work on wheels rebuild. After that we will start with the assembly of the bike. So for today's episode I'm going to I'm going to show you how to rebuild front wheel of this motorcycle. This is a Lester wheel that the bike has, and disc or rotor is in pretty good shape. I checked it, it's according to specs, so there is no need to change it. I believe this is Brembo disc that the bike has, and then we will proceed with bearings change. After we remove the old bearings, I'm going to mask the wheel and paint it so it looks a bit better than it's actually now, and we are also going to polish the shiny part, and after we are done with that, new bearings will go in, and with that we are going to complete the rebuild of this wheel. So please join me for this part of the restoration. So we will start with first rotor removal, and there are basically 5 bolts that hold it in place. We need to loosen those. Okay, so the next thing, we need to remove this nut, and hopefully our tool that we used for the rear shock gland nut will help us here. There it is. Okay, this seal will be replaced. Okay, bearing. Here is bearing that we will replace. And inside there's a tube. Alright, so both nuts with the seals are out, bearings, inner parts are out, compression rings or top heads out, and also this spacer that goes in the middle is out. The only thing that I don't see is a wedding band, and I'm not sure if this was actually set properly, like a preload of these bearings. Without it, I'll double check it, but usually there is a wedding bed. Maybe something is different with the Lester wheels, but anyway, with new bearings we are going to set preload properly, and it's actually a good idea that we are replacing these bearings, because if preload was not set properly, then that could lead to a disaster. Okay, so now the only thing that we need to do is actually remove these outer races from the wheel itself. And for that I'm going to use a puller. Okay, so whenever you have two different kind of materials, like for instance here hub is made of aluminum and then outer race is obviously made of steel, it's good to apply a bit of heat because aluminum expands a bit quicker than the steel, and then you have easier job removing this outer race. Time to clean everything, and then we will put outer races back in, prepare wheel for painting. In the same time we are going to work on a preload of the bearings. Okay, so now when everything is clean, we can actually put the new outer races just like that. We are going to heat up hub again so they slide easily inside. And for that I'm just going to use regular seal or bearing driver. So next we are going to remove seals from these nuts. So now we are going to clean everything and then start with a setting preload. Okay, so here we are back with all parts properly cleaned, and now we can continue with the assembly. First we are going to put new seals in these nuts, and so keep on your mind that these seals actually come in different shapes. These actually are flat on top. Some of them have a raised lip. For the raised lip you will need to use socket instead of regular seal driver. These don't have a raised lip, so I can go with a seal driver and just put them in. Well, actually they go pretty nicely only with fingers, so no need to use seal driver at all. Okay. Here is a new tapered bearing. Outer races are already pressed in, you saw that. I have a shaft, then I have a central spacer inside, and then here I basically have a selection of shims. Each shim is 0.05 millimeters. I have 10 of them. This was a kit that I bought at Cycleworks, and a kit comes with these 10 shims that help you with the setting a preload. And then also there are two wedding bands. One is, I believe, 6.25 and another one 6.75 millimeters, but you can check on a website for the accurate dimension. And then with these two wedding bands and 10 shims you can actually properly set the preload. Since these are Lester wheels that I have here, they did not have any kind of wedding band here, only this tube, and actually no shims whatsoever. So I hope that preload was properly adjusted at that point, but anyway, I'm going to show you how it's done with the set that I have here. Okay, so here we are. The easiest way of doing this is actually if you mount wheel in a vise in a soft jaws, and then we can proceed with setting the preload. Taper bearings, compared to seal bearings, they always need to be properly preloaded. If you actually press them too much, you are running of a chance of destroying them. If it's too loose, then it won't work properly. So that's why it's very important to set them properly. And the way how you are doing that is there are different more or less scientific methods. Feel free to look online. One good resource is actually Brooke Rim's website, where he explains how he does it with a scale. Or you can actually play by feeling and set it that way, and that's what I'm going to show you here. Tapered bearings are basically cylindrical bearings. These are very quality bearings that can last for a very long time, but the important thing is that you set them correctly. Okay, so this is how we are going to do it. You have a shaft, you drive one bearing on a shaft, then you take this sleeve and you run everything from the other side through. Bearings needs to be dry for this purpose. Now, since these are Lester wheels, there is no wedding band, there is no space for that. If you are using regular BMW wheels, you would have a wedding band at this point coming from this side. And I can show you actually, if I take any wedding band, I put it here, and then I have another bearing that goes on this side. You can already see that there is no way I can actually make this working, because it's just too much free play introduced by this wedding band, so that needs to go out. Okay, so if I try without anything, just that just that sleeve inside, so another bearing. And then you will need to have some kind of tubing to offset this part of a shaft and to be able to tighten it. It's important that tube is square actually, that these two parts are perpendicular, so when you are tightening, that you are tightening it in a right way. Okay, so that's tube, and I would like to use the opportunity to thank to my friend Brooke, who let me borrow this nice tube from him so I can complete this job. And then we will just take original nut and torque this. So spec calls here for between 33 and 37 foot-pound, and I'm going to use 35. Okay. So this is without any spacer, and I don't need to completely torque this. I already know this is just going to be too much. You see, it's completely locked, it cannot move. Okay. So if we don't add, we saw that with wedding band we cannot tighten it properly, and then without anything the wheel is locked and it cannot freely spin, which means that we will need to start adding shimming actually inside to set the preload correctly. So what I have here is basically 4 of these shims. I already tried this before, and the correct number is 5 shims, but I want to show you what's happening with 4, 5 and 6. So I have these 4 shims, each shim, as I said, is 0.05. Okay, 4 shims and then a bearing, and now my tube with washer and nut. Okay, try to center the tube as much as you can. And now let's torque this one. Okay. Okay, so this one now does not have any free play, but it's pretty, it's still kind of stiff, not the way how I like it. Okay, so that means we need to add some more shimming inside. Okay, let's loosen it. Make sure that shims are not stick to the bearing when you are removing. So currently I have 4. And I'm going to put 2 more, so total 6 of them. Now, since I already tried it, I know that this is going to be just tiny bit too much. 4 was just tiny bit too little. Okay. My bearing goes back. Right. Now let's torque this one. Okay. Now if you look at this one, it still does not have any free play, but this one spins really easily. This is how bearing that is at the end of its life would actually spin. You know, you spin it and then it starts spinning forever until you stop it. This is how this one sounds. This is just not enough preload for this one because it spins so easily. Okay, and now finally we are going to remove one shim, which means we have total 5 of them. 5 shims of 0.05 brings us to 0.25 millimeters, and that's actually correct amount. And of course yours is going to vary. It depends on the setup of a wheel that you have. Now you can do this without shims by actually sanding your wedding ring slowly. You know, for instance, you start with a bigger one. If smaller one is kind of too small and bigger too big, then you start sanding until you get it right. That will work as well, but it takes some more time. With shimming it's pretty easy. You just put shims in or out, you know, depending on preload. Okay. Okay, now they are so thin that I want to count them, and it needs to be 5. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1 is inside already, it seems. Take that one out. Now let's count them. Sometimes they stick to each other, so it's really hard to get them separated because they are so thin. 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is 5. The 6th one goes back. Okay, push them all in. Bearing is in, and my tubing. So now if you check this one, this is correct amount. Of course there is no free play, but we didn't have that with 6 as well. But then when you spin, it's actually not spinning forever. It just has tiny bit of friction there that you want, not too much, but this is the right amount of preload that you want. And then when everything heats up, and of course when grease inside, this is going to be really nice and can give many miles of these bearings in a wheel. Okay, so that is essentially how you set preload. Now if you want, there are other methods where you can, like Brooke, use scale and actually cross-check if this is correct. I did that for 5 shims and I was right on spot for that, but I'm not going to cover that here. I can leave the description, like link in a video where you can check that method. But this is what like all the time worked for me, how to set it up. Okay, now when we are done with setting the preload, we can actually start putting things back together and grease everything. These bearings are, as I said previously, dry, and they need to be packed with grease. For this purpose you are going to use high temp through bearing grease, because they keep rotating and produce a lot of heat. And the only thing that I'm not going to put back is brake rotor, and the reason for that is because I want to paint this wheel. So after I put like caps back and grease everything, I'll go ahead with masking this wheel and then painting it. Okay, so now basically let's proceed with packing the grease on the bearings and putting the caps on. Okay, so as I said, any kind of true bearing grease, I like this liquid moly LM50, works really nice for this application. You can also use a bearing packer, but you can do it by hand as well. So first, what you want to do is actually put some grease inside in a hub, and the reason for that because grease will fly out due to temperature, so you want to have this properly greased. That's enough. Now what you want to do is take the grease on your hand, and then bearing, you just start doing it slowly like this, packing it inside. And once when you see grease coming on the top of the bearing, so you are packing it from the bottom, so once when it starts coming to the top, that means it's fully packed. Okay. There it is. So you can see actually grease coming to the top. And now you slowly rotate it and repeat the process. That's it. So this one can be inserted, and we'll drive it from this side. Okay. Okay, so now we can take the other one and repeat the same process. Okay, so now it's time to put the cap back on. I'll just take a tiny bit of grease to lube it, or to grease it. The seal. That's it. Okay, one thing before you put it on, there are top hats or compression rings that need to go through. Just like that, you just push it in. There it is, goes up out through the seal on this side, and then you just screw it in. Just going to make it snug with my improvised tool. Okay, now back on this side. So to make sure that everything is squared and properly aligned, I'm going to insert the shaft inside. Okay. Now this spacer tube goes in. Just like that. After that, my 5 shims, I want to count them to make sure that everything is in there. placed it. Alright, and now another packed bearing goes in. Okay. At the same time, we will take another cap and grease this seal. Dry the compression ring. Okay. And then screw it. Alright, I'll tighten it later. For now, it's only snug. And that's it. With this, we completed the rebuild of this wheel. We put the new bearings in, set the correct preload since they are tapered. And now it's time to mask everything and then paint it. Just one note when assembling the putting rotor back on a wheel. This was not done properly before. So what I discovered, there were like two issues. First, these huge washers, you can use these or regular washers, but how they go, one actually goes on this side and then the other goes on the aluminum side of a hub. How, if you look carefully at the beginning when we were disassembling, these two were actually on two sides of the rotor, and that's not how they should be placed. Another thing that was not correct that I noticed during disassembly is that nuts were on this side where there is no rotor. This is a single rotor brake system, while bolts were from the side where rotor is, and that's wrong, that's not correct. Nuts always need to be at the side where rotor is. If you have rotors on both sides, like dual rotors, then it's almost, there's no difference, but just from the, you know, appearance perspective, nuts always need to be placed where the rotors are. And what's the reason for that? So both of these sides are the same, and there is actually here a raised shoulder on the hub. So that raised shoulder kind of comes completely flush with the rotor, and that enables you to put nut in a rotor and torque it to spec using you know, normal socket. If you put a nut on the opposite side where you don't have a rotor, then nut goes all the way close to that shoulder, and you can only use open end wrench. You end up stripping the nut and you cannot torque it properly. That's right. That's why nuts always go from the side where rotor is. Okay, so with this I would like to conclude this episode. I hope you found it useful, and for the next episode I'm going to focus on a rear wheel. I'll show you how to do that one. Ride safe.